Welcome back, everybody. Ready to dive into some more fascinating history?
Always.
Okay, so today we're tackling power dynamics and the art of influence.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, we've got historical anecdotes, some philosophy, and some really interesting observations on how people gain and wield power.
Awesome.
So, our mission to extract some seriously valuable knowledge about strategy, influence, and how to apply this to, well, pretty much any aspect of life. Your game.
Let's do it.
All right, let's jump right in. Our first source tackles a really common challenge: how to escape the shadow of a powerful predecessor.
Ooh, I see where you're going with this. Like, how do you step out and establish your own authority
Yeah,
when you're following the footsteps of, say, a Louis XIV or an Alexander the Great?
exactly. It's like, how do you become the main character when the previous one was such a legend?
Right. Huge shoes to fill.
So let's start with Louis XIV. He didn't just inherit power, he actively reshaped the whole game. Like, building Versailles wasn't just about a fancy palace.
Yeah, he created a whole new power center. By moving the court away from Paris, he shifted the entire playing field. It was a power move, forcing the nobility to come to him, play by his rules.
It's like he strategically redesigned the game board. But what about Alexander the Great? He had a legendary father, Philip of Macedon, to contend with. How'd he break free from that legacy?
Well, Alexander was incredibly strategic. He knew he couldn't just try to outdo his father in the same arena. He chose a different path to glory, conquering new territories, created his own epic narrative.
So it's not just about rejecting the past, it's more like redirecting that energy towards something new. You create your own ground zero, even if you can't literally start from scratch.
Exactly. And it's fascinating, the psychological aspect. Both Louis XIV and Alexander the Great understood that power isn't just about brute force or politics.
Mm.
It's about shaping perceptions.
Controlling the narrative,
Huh.
making people see your authority in the way you want them to.
Right. But there's a flip side to this, a potential danger. What happens when you make that clean break? What about that void you leave behind when you make such a dramatic change?
Okay, I see what you mean. Our next source looks at exactly the dangers of leaving a power vacuum.
Louis V is a great example. He inherited this well-established system from his grandfather, the Sun King himself, but he just didn't actively shape it. Things stagnated.
Yeah, he didn't fill the void with his own vision, so he became more of a figurehead than a true leader.
Exactly. But then you've got Augustus, who followed Julius Caesar. Talk about a tough act to follow. He brilliantly understood that he needed to differentiate himself.
Yeah, instead of trying to be another Caesar, he cultivated this contrasting image, quiet dignity, a return to traditional values.
Spot on. It's like early branding, right?
Yeah,
Creating his own distinct identity.
absolutely. So, takeaway here: stepping into any new role, you need to be proactive. You have to actively shape your presence, your own personal brand, or you'll get lost in the shuffle.
Couldn't agree more. You have to control how people perceive you. If you don't, someone else will.
Okay, now let's get a little more of that direct. Let's talk about banishment.
Oh, wow. Really getting into it now.
Right. Our sources take us to ancient Athens, where ostracism was a strategic tool.
Yeah, the Athenians used it to maintain balance, keep their democracy stable by removing potential threats.
And they really understood how one person could disrupt an entire system.
Right. And our sources look at two fascinating examples, Aristides and Themistocles. Brilliant Athenian generals, war heroes even, who ended up ostracized.
Victims of their own success.
In a way, they kept reminding everyone of their achievements, became what the sources call troublemakers, the kind of individuals who, whether they mean to or not, just disrupt the harmony of a group.
And that's not just ancient history. We all know that person who sucks the energy out of a room. Brilliant in some ways, maybe, but ultimately toxic to the group.
Totally. And what's crucial is that we recognize these negative influences early on before they poison the whole environment. It's about protecting the collective.
Okay, so next up, we've got the art of persuasion.
Ah, always a good one.
Yeah, it's about that softening people up before making your move, appealing to someone's motivations rather than just hitting them with logic.
Right, because logic alone isn't always enough to persuade people. You've got to get to their emotions too.
Totally. Our source uses the example of Chico Liang, the brilliant Chinese strategist. He needed an alliance with a powerful but hesitant general.
So instead of arguing, he took a different approach. A bit cunning, you might say. He appealed to the general's insecurity by implying their enemy was after the general's wife.
Wow, that's playing dirty.
It was a bold move, But it shows the power of understanding vulnerabilities. And this isn't just ancient history. Our sources point to modern figures like Mao Zedong.
Yeah, despite being highly educated, he used simple language, relatable metaphors, and he tapped into people's anxieties. He knew how to resonate with the masses to win them over.
It's a great lesson. Persuasion is about appealing to people's hearts as much as their minds.
Absolutely. You got to understand what truly motivates people. Okay, now for something a little different and, well, a bit unnerving. We're going to talk about mirror effects.
Mirrors. Okay, this I've got to hear.
Right. It's about how they can be used to influence, manipulate, even seduce. It all stems from how mirrors kind of unsettle us. They reflect back at us this detached version of ourselves.
Yeah, mirrors are weird. I get it. So how does this tie into power dynamics?
Well, our source outlines four main types of mirror effects: neutralizing, shadow, moral, and the seducer's mirror.
Okay, I'm hooked. Let's start with neutralizing. How do you use a mirror to, like, neutralize a threat?
Think of it like this. You're reflecting their behavior, their words, right back at them. It exposes the flaws in their arguments or even their deceptions.
So it's like calling out their BS by making them see it in themselves.
Exactly. But mirroring can get more aggressive. Enter the shadow effect.
Ooh, now we're getting to the good stuff.
Right. This one isn't about exposing lies. It's about making someone experience the consequences of their own actions. The source uses Ivan the Terrible as an example.
Even the terrible. Okay, I'm all ears.
So he had a rough childhood, constantly mocked by the boyars, the Russian nobility.
Yeah, Ivan had a pretty messed up upbringing, didn't he?
When he came to power, he wanted revenge. So he put this powerless double, Simeon Bekbilatovich, on the throne.
Wait, a double? Like a fake Ivan?
Exactly, but not as a co-ruler, more like a puppet.
Wow. I bet that messed with the boyars' heads.
It was a mind game. The boyars treated Simeon the way they'd treated Ivan. They were basically forced to experience their own disrespect and the instability they'd created.
It's cold, but kind of brilliant.
It shows the power of mirroring. It can be used for defense, but also for some pretty intense manipulation.
Okay, so what about the moral effect? How's that different?
Think of it as mirroring for good. You're prompting self-reflection, ideally leading to positive change.
Oh, interesting.
The source uses Dr. Milton Erickson as an example. He was a hypnotherapist who used mirroring to help couples with their problems.
Okay, how do you do that?
Instead of confronting the issues directly, he'd subtly mirror their dysfunctional behavior back at them. It helped them recognize the issues themselves without judgment.
It's like holding up a mirror so they can see themselves more clearly. That's really cool.
Right. It's subtle, but powerful. Okay, ready for the grand finale.
Hit me with it. What's the seducer's mirror all about?
It's all about reflecting back to someone their deepest desires, values, their best selves. It creates this intense connection. The source gives the example of Marie Mancini and her relationship with the young Louis XIV.
Marie Mancini. I remember reading about her. Not classically beautiful, but she totally captivated the future Sun King. How'd she pull that off?
She mirrored his aspirations. She showed him the powerful, charismatic ruler he wanted to be.
It wasn't just flattery, right?
No, it was deeper than that.
Hmm?
She understood his desires and reflected them back in a way that felt genuine.
That's the key. That feeling of being seen, truly understood, can be intoxicating.
Exactly. So there you have it. 4 types of mirror effects, all showing how powerful this concept can be.
It's all about intention, right?
Mhm.
Knowing how to use these techniques for good or, well, not so good.
Now, ready for a curveball, let's talk about playing the sucker.
Playing the sucker, what do you mean?
Intentionally appearing less intelligent than your target to gain an advantage.
Now that sounds counterintuitive. Why would anyone make themselves look foolish?
Because it plays on people's need to feel intellectually superior.
It makes them overconfident, easy to manipulate. Sneaky.
Our source tells the story of a diamond mine hoax. They pulled it off on Baron Rothschild, one of the wealthiest men in the world.
Seriously, they tricked Rothschild.
Okay, how'd they do it?
They knew he was incredibly proud of his financial savvy. They presented themselves as clueless prospectors, made him think he was smarter than them.
So he became blind to their deception. Wow.
Exactly. It's all about feeding the ego to create a blind spot you can exploit. That's a high-risk, high-reward kind of game. So how do we protect ourselves from falling prey to this tactic?
Be wary of anyone who's way too eager to make you feel smart. Always question their motives, and don't let flattery cloud your judgment.
Good advice. Don't let that ego get the best of you.
All right, next concept. Strategic generosity.
Strategic generosity. Isn't generosity supposed to be, well, generous?
It is. But our sources explore how gifts, favors can be used to influence others, to shape their behavior.
Makes sense.
The source uses Ninon de L'Enclos, the French courtesan, as an example. She had this system for dealing with her suitors. She'd give them two options:
Okay, what were they?
payer or martyr. Payers obviously paid for her company, but martyrs, they just admired her from afar.
So either way, she controlled the dynamic.
Exactly. She gave them the illusion of choice while subtly controlling their behavior. Brilliant.
Very clever. It's about understanding what motivates people and then offering choices that, while seemingly empowering, actually work in your favor.
All right, let's dive into the world of fantasy now.
Well, this should be good.
Right. The source focuses on Bragadino, an alchemist who captivated Venice with his promise of turning dust into gold.
Classic alchemist story. But what makes this one stand out?
Well, it highlights how fantasy thrives when things are tough. Venice was in decline, and Bragadino swooped in, offering this seductive escape from reality.
Yeah, people were desperate for a miracle. Turning dust into gold, that's the ultimate quick fix.
Exactly. And he focused on that emotional appeal of instant wealth rather than the long, hard work of rebuilding. It was incredibly seductive.
So the lesson here is to be wary of anyone who promises easy solutions or instant gratification. Real progress takes time and effort.
Now, for our final source in this section, we're going to explore a concept that's absolutely crucial in power dynamics.
Timing. Timing. As in when to make your move.
You got it. Napoleon famously said, "The greatest danger occurs at the moment of victory." He knew that success can make you complacent, lead to bad decisions.
Interesting. Almost like that saying, pride comes before the fall.
Exactly. Our sources tell the cautionary tale of Cyrus the Great. He was defeated by Queen Tamiris because he got impatient, underestimated his opponent, and ignored strategic advice.
So being bold and decisive is important, but you have to pick the right moment. Timing is everything.
It's like a negotiation. Rushing in means you might concede too much. But patience can often lead to a much better outcome.
It's about knowing when to hold back and when to go all in.
Exactly.
Okay, ready to dive back in.
Absolutely. Where do we go next?
Well, our next source looks at the importance of not just adapting to change, but actually driving it. It uses Henry VIII and his break from the Catholic Church as a prime example.
Talk about a power move. He reshaped the entire religious landscape of England, all because he wanted a divorce.
He was clever, though. He framed this radical change as a return to a pure form of Christianity.
He tapped into existing traditions, nationalistic sentiments, made it seem less like a revolution and more like a restoration.
Exactly. And that framing is key. He didn't just declare himself the head of a new church. He presented it as a fulfillment of existing beliefs.
It's almost like he hijacked the narrative and made it serve his own purpose.
Precisely. And it's not just him. Our sources point to the early Christian church doing something similar.
Oh, how so?
Think about the date chosen for Christmas, December 25th. It coincides with existing pagan festivals, like the Roman celebration of Mithras.
Interesting. So instead of trying to wipe out those pagan traditions, they kind of absorbed them.
Exactly. They blended the old with the new, creating a smoother transition.
Smart move. Okay, now let's talk about charlatans.
Ooh, those masters of manipulation. What about them?
What makes them so effective? They prey on people's hopes and fears.
Well, they're experts at spectacle and persuasion. They tap into group psychology, creating these cult-like followings.
It's like people lose their individual skepticism when they're part of a crowd. Makes them easier to influence.
Exactly. Think about those charismatic preachers or self-help gurus who attract massive crowds. They use stage presence, powerful language, and create an aura of mystery.
And they often mix religion with science, don't they? It's appealing because it feels both familiar and revolutionary at the same time.
Right, and they often target those deep-seated desires, especially around things like sexuality and wealth, promise fulfillment or liberation, while secretly exploiting those very desires.
So how can we protect ourselves from these kinds of figures? It feels like they're everywhere.
It all comes down to healthy skepticism. Be wary of anyone claiming to have all the answers or promising easy solutions to complex problems. Question their motives. Trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is.
Good advice. All right, our next source emphasizes a different approach to power: boldness and decisiveness in action.
So going all in, committing fully to your actions.
Exactly. The source argues that hesitation or timidity can be perceived as weakness.
Because it makes people question your competence.
Exactly. But when you act with confidence, even if it's a bit risky, it inspires belief. even if your approach is unconventional.
Interesting. Almost like you're creating your own reality, your own narrative.
Right. And your confidence becomes contagious. This reminds me of the story of Reb Favel and the sea monster.
Oh, I love that story. What a great example of collective belief.
Right. Reb Favel, even though he's skeptical, gets caught up in the frenzy. He knows it's probably a hoax, but he still gets swept along.
It's just how susceptible we are to social pressure, to the perceived wisdom of the crowd, even when our own logic tells us otherwise.
Totally. And it also reminds me of Franz Mesmer.
Ah, Mesmer, the master of animal magnetism.
He was a showman, creating this atmosphere of heightened expectation and suggestibility, even though his methods were, well, questionable.
His confidence was contagious, though, wasn't it? People believed because he believed so strongly.
Okay, moving on. Our next source looks at strategic generosity.
Strategic generosity. I thought we already talked about that.
We did. But this source dives deeper, exploring how gifts and favors, whether consciously or not, can be used to build influence and shape people's behavior.
Ah, so it's about the motivations behind those generous acts.
Exactly. The source uses Ninon de L'Enclos, the French courtesan, as an example. She created this whole system that gave her incredible freedom and power despite her unconventional profession.
How did she manage that?
She understood the power imbalances between courtesans and their clients. So she offered her suitors a choice, payer or martyr.
Right. Payers supported her financially while martyrs admired her from a distance. Brilliant.
It was a clever way to control the dynamic, to maintain her independence. Both options played to the suitor's desires, but ultimately they were playing by her rules.
It's a great example of how strategic generosity can be used to subtly influence and control.
Okay, now let's talk about the ideal courtier. What are the traits and strategies that help someone thrive in those environments where power is constantly shifting?
Well, our sources describe the perfect courtier as having this blend of social intelligence, charm, and strategic cunning.
It sounds exhausting, like they're constantly adapting, reading people, figuring out the angles.
They have to be. Think of them as chameleons. They know how to navigate social hierarchies, always saying the right thing, being seen with the right people.
And never making a wrong move, I bet.
Exactly. They're masters of indirection. They use flattery, subtle persuasion, and strategic alliances to get what they want, but they never seem aggressive or overly ambitious.
Our sources highlight Baldassare Castiglione, the Italian diplomat. His book, The Book of the Courtier, basically became a guide for aspiring courtiers.
Oh yeah, Castiglione. He laid out all those essential qualities: grace, wit, eloquence, and a deep understanding of etiquette and power dynamics.
Sounds like a manual for social climbing and political maneuvering, but are these skills really relevant today?
Absolutely. The environments might be different, but those principles of social intelligence and networking, those are timeless.
I guess so. Relationships and influence are key in just about any field.
Exactly. So understanding those dynamics, that subtle art of persuasion, invaluable.
Yeah.
Okay, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about a tactic that's both powerful and dangerous, playing on people's fears and anxieties.
Oh, that's a good one. Fear is a powerful motivator.
It is. And those who understand how to manipulate fear can have a huge influence on others. Because when we're afraid, we don't think clearly.
Our survival instincts take over, right? We're more likely to follow someone who seems confident and in control.
Exactly. Our sources point to examples from history and modern times. Ancient rulers using fear to maintain control, politicians and advertisers using it to shape opinions.
Right, like using fear to get people to vote a certain way or buy a certain product, it can be incredibly effective, but also dangerous.
Absolutely. It reminds me of Ivan the Terrible and his Oprichnina.
Oh yeah, his secret police force that terrorized the Russian population.
Exactly. He created this climate of fear and paranoia to eliminate any threats to his power. Brutal, but effective, at least for a while.
It's a short-term strategy, though, isn't it? You can't rule through fear forever.
Right. People eventually get tired of living in fear, and that can lead to rebellion.
Okay, now let's talk about a tactic that's used all the time in marketing and sales. Creating a sense of urgency and scarcity.
Ah, the FOMO factor. That fear of missing out is a powerful motivator.
Our source talks about the miracle water of Lourdes, a spring in France that became a pilgrimage site for those seeking healing.
Because of the perceived scarcity of this miracle water, right? Combined with those testimonials from people who claim to have been cured.
Exactly. It created this huge demand, even though there was no scientific evidence to support those claims.
It's a great example of how scarcity, even when it's based on belief rather than fact, can drive behavior.
It shows how powerful that interplay of rational thought and emotional triggers can be. Okay, let's talk about mystery and unpredictability.
Keeping people guessing. Why is that important for power?
Because predictability makes you vulnerable. If your opponents know what to expect, they can easily counter you.
But if you're unpredictable, they're always off balance. They hesitate to act against you.
Exactly. It's like you're always one step ahead. Our source uses Queen Elizabeth I as an example.
Ah, good old Queen Bess,
Yeah,
a master of political strategy.
she was. She excelled at playing different factions against each other, never revealing her true allegiances, and always maintaining this air of mystery. No wonder she ruled for so long.
She was a master class in calculated ambiguity.
Now, our next source looks at a more aggressive tactic, isolating your opponents and weakening their support systems. Classic divide and conquer, right?
It's a strategy as old as time. Break up alliances, turn allies against each other, make your target vulnerable.
And it's used everywhere: politics, business, even personal relationships.
Right. One source uses Julius Caesar and his conquest of Gaul as an example. He didn't just defeat his enemies with brute force, he exploited rivalries between Gallic tribes.
Turn them against each other, weakening their resistance. Smart.
It highlights how power isn't always about strength in numbers. Sometimes it's about understanding relationships and using them to your advantage.
Okay, shifting gears again. Our next source focuses on the art of manipulating perceptions and controlling information, basically controlling the narrative.
Shaping how events are perceived. That's powerful stuff.
It is. It happens all the time in media, politics, even in our personal lives.
The source uses Edward Bernays as an example. He's often called the father of public relations.
Right. He used psychological techniques to shape public opinion and influence behavior.
He understood the power of framing, using staged events, celebrity endorsements, and carefully crafted messages to control the narrative.
It's a reminder that we need to be critical thinkers. We have to question the sources of information, be aware of those subtle ways our perceptions are being manipulated.
Absolutely. Especially in today's world where information overload is a real thing. Okay, ready for a slightly uncomfortable topic?
Hit me with it.
Our next source talks about the tactic of framing yourself as a victim.
Playing the victim card, isn't that a bit manipulative?
It can be. It's a way to deflect criticism, shift blame, and make yourself seem sympathetic, even when you're the one in the wrong.
So, politicians caught in scandal, celebrities facing backlash, they try to redirect the attention by claiming they're the real victims.
Exactly. And it often works. People tend to believe a victim, especially when they deliver their story with a lot of emotion.
It's powerful, but it's also a bit disturbing, isn't it? The source uses the chilling example of Adolf Hitler. He used propaganda to paint Germany as a victim of the Treaty of Versailles and other injustices.
And that fueled resentment and nationalism, ultimately helping him rise to power. Scary stuff.
It shows how easily victim narratives can be exploited. We need to be critical and not just blindly accept those narratives at face value.
Okay, shifting gears again. Remember our conversation about scarcity and urgency?
Oh yeah, the FOMO factor. What about it?
The source dives deeper, using the example of the tulip mania in 17th century Holland.
Oh wow, the tulip mania. When the price of tulip bulbs went through the roof.
Exactly. It was driven by speculation, a fear of missing out on what seemed like easy money. It was a classic speculative bubble.
And it eventually burst, leaving a lot of people broke.
A harsh lesson in how those feelings of scarcity and urgency, while they can be powerful motivators, can also lead to bad decisions.
Okay, let's talk about social proof and how it influences us.
The idea that we're more likely to do something if we see others doing it.
Right, like those online reviews. We're more likely to buy something if it has tons of positive reviews.
Or those trending topics on social media. We're drawn to what's popular, what everyone's talking about.
It's like a herd mentality. We're wired to follow the crowd even when it might not be the best choice. Our source uses the example of bar owners salting their establishment.
Salting, what does that mean?
Hiring people to pretend to be enthusiastic customers.
To create the illusion of popularity. Sneaky.
Right, it makes people think, hey, if it's crowded, it must be good.
So how do we resist that pull? It seems like social proof is everywhere.
It's about being aware of it, recognizing when it's being used to manipulate us. We need to think for ourselves, make choices based on our own values, not just what everyone else is doing.
Good advice. Okay, ready for a bit of a counterintuitive tactic?
Always.
This source explores the art of play numb.
Playing dumb. Why would anyone do that?
Think of it as a way to disarm your opponents. You feign ignorance or incompetence to make them underestimate you.
Ah, so they let their guard down. And then you can take advantage of their weaknesses.
Exactly. The source uses the fable of the fox and the crow as an example. The fox flatters the crow, praising her voice, knowing she'll open her beak and drop the cheese.
Classic fable. It's amazing how these simple stories can illustrate such profound truths about human nature.
Okay, let's move on to a tactic that's incredibly powerful, but often overlooked, controlling the narrative.
That's about shaping how events are perceived.
Right. It's about framing the story in a way that benefits you, even if it doesn't align with the truth. We see this all the time. Media, politics, even personal relationships.
The source uses the Watergate scandal as an example.
Ah, yes. The Nixon administration, trying to control the story, deny involvement, and cover up evidence, didn't end well for them.
It's a reminder that honesty and transparency are usually the best policy. The truth has a way of coming out eventually.
Okay, ready to dive into the world of cognitive biases.
Cognitive biases.
They're basically mental shortcuts our brains use to make sense of the world.
So, like simplified ways of thinking. But how does that tie into power dynamics?
Well, these shortcuts can lead to errors in judgment, especially when we're evaluating information or making decisions that involve power.
Interesting. Our sources mention confirmation bias, the halo effect, and the sunk cost fallacy.
Let's start with confirmation bias. It's our tendency to look for information that supports what we already believe, while ignoring evidence that contradicts those beliefs.
So if we think someone's trustworthy, we might ignore signs that suggest otherwise.
Exactly, and it can be dangerous, especially when power is involved, because it can lead to bad decisions based on incomplete or inaccurate information.
What about the halo effect?
That's when we judge someone based on our overall impression of them. We might overestimate the competence or trustworthiness of someone we find attractive or charismatic.
So those charming leaders who seem so trustworthy, even if their policies are questionable.
Exactly. We can be blinded by charisma, which can make us vulnerable to manipulation.
Okay, and what about the sunk cost fallacy?
That's when we keep investing in something time, money, effort, even when it's clearly not working.
Because we've already invested so much.
Right. It's that reluctance to admit we've made a mistake. It can keep us trapped in bad relationships, failing businesses, or even political ideologies.
It's a reminder that we need to be willing to cut our losses and move on, even if it's difficult.
Exactly. Holding on too tightly can do more harm than good. It can be tough to let go, though, especially when ego and pride are involved.
Absolutely. It's a good reminder to be aware of these biases, challenge our assumptions, and be willing to change direction when things aren't working.
Now, this next source circles back to a tactic we've touched on before, creating a sense of scarcity and urgency to influence behavior.
Oh yeah, the FOMO factor. It's
Mhm.
everywhere, right?
Everywhere. Marketing, sales, relationships. This source brings up a really interesting example, the miracle water of Lourdes,
The spring in France that supposedly has healing powers.
the one and only.
Hmm.
It attracted massive crowds. People believed it could cure all sorts of ailments.
And that perceived scarcity, along with all those stories of miraculous healings, created this huge demand.
Lourdes became a major pilgrimage site, all thanks to the power of scarcity, even if it was based more on belief than, well, actual fact.
It shows how easily our emotions can override our logic, especially when something is presented as rare or exclusive.
We're all susceptible to those emotional triggers, especially when they tap into our deep-seated desires or anxieties.
Okay, so we've explored a whole bunch of tactics and strategies, but maybe the most important takeaway is this: understanding those psychological levers that make people tick.
Absolutely. That's what this deep dive has really highlighted. Being aware of those levers, both in ourselves and others, gives us more control.
We've seen how power can be used for good or for evil, from the actions of great leaders to, well, the manipulations of con artists.
And power can be intoxicating, but we have to use it responsibly.
So as we wrap things up, I want you to think about the power dynamics in your own life, at work, in your relationships, everywhere.
Who holds the power? What tactics are they using? And how can you use this knowledge to navigate those situations more effectively?
The game of power is always being played, whether we realize it or not.
But by understanding the rules, we can make conscious choices, protect ourselves from manipulation, and hopefully use our own influence for good.
Exactly. We hope you found this deep dive insightful, maybe even a little thought-provoking.
Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and remember, knowledge is power.
And that's a wrap.